What's up, everyone? Eli here, back for a CD collection video. I finally got off my lazy ass and unpacked some more of my CDs. After living in this apartment for 6 months now, I'm like, Jesus Christ, I gotta get this going. So these are the videos I like doing the most. Pretty much the reason why I started doing this channel, pretty much entirely. So it's kind of my favorite thing to do, as far as all the videos that I do. So today we're only going to be talking about one band, and it's every CD I own from this band. I don't have. I'm missing a few albums and some stuff I have on vinyl, but this is just strictly from my CD collection. The band we're going to be talking about is a band that's very near and dear to my heart, and a lot of you guys are probably going to feel the same way. We're talking about Genesis. Obviously a band that needs no introduction. I'm not going to try and give you guys a history lesson or anything like that. The first 15 years of their career or whatever, I wasn't even alive for, so I'm not going to pretend like I'm some expert. However, it is a band that I've listened to for over 20 years at this point, and honestly, as I get older, I only love this band more and more, and it's really cool. I mean, they are on the fast track to becoming easily one of my top 5 favorite bands. So, all that bullshit aside, we'll get started. Now, I don't have their first album on any format. I just don't own it. So, obviously, we'll skip that one. The first album I do own from Genesis is their second album from 1970. We got Trespass. 1970, in the prog realm is still very early on. So Genesis were definitely an early prog band. Their first album, I think it came out in, was it like 68 or 69? So the lineup on this album, obviously, you don't have Phil Collins yet. You do have Peter Gabriel on vocals. And honestly, for the longest time, I didn't really realize how talented these guys truly are. I mean, they're all multi-instrumentalists. Like I said, Peter Gabriel not only doing vocals and not only writing lyrics, but he also plays flute, accordion, tambourine. Anthony Phillips, obviously, you typically know Anthony for for playing guitars, but he also plays the dulcimer. And he also does vocals, kind of backing vocals in the band. Anthony Banks, who you typically know for his keyboard work in Genesis. He does so much more than that too. I mean, he's a writer. He also plays, he plays all keys, organs, pianos, mellotrons, and he also does some vocals, and he also plays guitar on this album. It's crazy. And I'll be honest, I didn't know most of this. You got Michael Rutherford on not only guitar but also bass. Rutherford was he's always been the bass player, but not only bass, but also he plays acoustic guitars, cello, and vocals. And then you got John Mayhew on drums and vocals. I'm not real familiar with Mayhew. I don't know if he plays on the first album. But yeah, this would be the last album that he plays on. I do quite like this album. If you're going to check this out, at least check out the last track, The Knife. Not only is it a heavy song for Genesis, it's just a heavy song in general. It's almost like Black Sabbath heavy. Very, very, very cool song. It's worth listening to the entire album just to hear that. But there are other good songs as well. Obviously, this is a band still trying to find their footing, which they would very, very shortly after. So, like I said, there's going to be gaps in this discography. I don't have everything on CD, and this is just strictly out of my CD collection. The next thing I have is 1973, Selling England by the Pound. Fantastic album. This is known as one of their best albums, and rightfully so. At this point, they were starting to get very epic. Writing very long songs, very complex very complex songwriting and musicianship as well. I don't even know if you would say they were still finding their footing, but by this time they were already masters of their craft. And so the lineup on this, you got Phil Collins on drums, and some backing vocals. Michael Rutherford, of course, doing his thing, playing bass and some guitars. He plays sitar on this album. Yeah, you got Steve Hackett. I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is this is the second or third album Hackett plays on. A lot of people would say Steve Hackett was, the best guitarist in Genesis. Some people think they were never the same after he left. I totally get that. However, I think that they did plenty of, they did fine without him, although, Steve does definitely, one of the best guitarists in rock history, so he definitely adds a lot to the albums that he plays on. His guitar playing style is definitely different than the other guitarists in Genesis. Tony Banks, once again, on keyboards, and Peter Gabriel on vocals, of course, vocals and flute, and oboe, and some percussion, because Peter Gabriel always kind of did dabble in drums and percussion. Yeah, phenomenal album. A lot of people will say this is the best Genesis album. It's not my personal favorite, but it is, one of the best albums in prog history. I don't think there's really much debating to be done there. Next, I have just 1 year later, 1974. They put out the double album "Lamb Lies Down on Broadway." This album right here is, you ask, 10 prog diehards to list, the best, maybe the 10 best albums in prog history. I bet you at least 8 or 9 of them, maybe even all 10. This is going to be on the list. This is a masterwork, one of the best prog albums of all time. Every time I listen to this, I've been playing it a lot lately, to be honest. Every time I listen to this, I hear things that I did not notice from before. Yeah, and they never really would replicate this. I'm not saying that they were trying either, but this album, this is just not something that anyone could do twice. So yeah, it's a double disc because it's long as hell. And line up and everything here. I'm definitely checking on everyone. I don't exactly remember lineups, especially with bands that had quite a few lineup changes, and they did. Not a ton, but they had they certainly had a few. All right, so I'm not seeing it. Sorry, I don't. Obviously, you got Phil Collins on drums, Peter Gabriel on vocals. You definitely have Mike Rutherford. You definitely have. I'm pretty sure Tony Banks is in the band. I can't remember if Steve Hackett is still there. Sorry, guys. Well, that was dumb. I can't remember if Steve Hackett's still in the band at this point. If I had known it wasn't going to be in the booklet, I probably would have taken some notes or something like that, but I did not. So, yeah, anyways, I think I've said more than enough. Okay. It's on the back. Sorry. Fidgety here. All right. Lineup of Tony Banks, Michael Rutherford, Peter Gabriel, Steve Hackett, and Phil Collins. All right. So Steve, still in the band at this point. 1976. They had a 2-year gap this time. I'm sure they needed it. They put out an album that is, honestly, I always liked it, but lately I'm listening to this more than I ever did, and I'm liking it more and more. This is slowly becoming one of my favorite, easily one of my favorite Genesis albums, A Trick of the Tail. So there were some changes here. Peter Gabriel left the band. Phil Collins stepped up, did vocals, which kind of crazy when you think about it. The band, of course, they were nervous about losing very nervous about losing Gabriel. I mean, he was already on his way to becoming this iconic frontman. Losing something like that could easily just cripple a band. And there are people that kind of gave up on Genesis after Gabriel left. I'm certainly not one of them, but I also, I wasn't even alive at the time, so I don't know how I would have reacted, 1976. So anyways, yeah, you got Rutherford, Tony Banks, Phil Collins, and Steve Hackett. They were a four-piece at this point. Phil Collins doing drums and vocals. Man, just check out this album. You could hear a little bit more cohesive songwriting. I don't want to say it's far from being a pop album, but some more, straightforward pop-esque elements, like, more poppy choruses and stuff like that. But I always said this album is kind of like it straddles both eras of Genesis. The complex prog side and the more cohesive poppy side. This album kind of has best of both worlds, while still definitely having a firm foot, in prog territory. I mean, this is still definitely a prog album. As nervous as they were, for losing Peter Gabriel, Phil Collins did a fantastic job. He really stepped up and knocked it out of the park as far as I'm concerned. Excellent album, definitely. If you've slept on this one, don't do it any longer. At least listen to the first song, "Dance on a Volcano." One of my favorite Genesis songs, easily. So, the same goddamn year, later on that year, in 1976, they would put out yet another album. Putting out two albums of this caliber at the same year is just, to me, is mind-blowing. So yeah, we got Wind and Wuthering. I really love this album. Again, this is still rooted in full-on prog territory, but still slowly inching towards the cohesive kind of art pop stuff that they would do later on. They didn't just kind of become that band overnight. They did it very slowly. Like I said, this album is still definitely a prog album, but it's a little bit less complex than most of the albums that preceded it. But still a quite complex album. As far as the lineup goes, still got Tony Banks, Phil Collins. Okay, Steve Hackett's still there. Mike Rutherford, still a four-piece. Until 2 years later, in 1978, Steve Hackett would leave, and then you had the album called "And Then There Were Three," indicating a change in the band yet again, losing another member, now a three-piece instead of a four. So you got Collins, Rutherford, and Banks. This album, I would say, out of all the albums I just showed, I do like this album, but this is my least favorite of I would say, of 70s Genesis. Still a fine album, still fun to listen to. So yeah, you got Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford, and Phil Collins. Rutherford playing all guitars, bass and all guitars. I would say Steve Hackett's guitar playing is definitely missed, but Mike Rutherford really stepped up. Like I said, still very much inching even more towards cohesive art pop territory. I would still call this a prog album. It's just the prog elements are definitely lighter here than they had been on all the previous 70s albums, except for maybe Trespass. I do like this album. It's not one of my favorites. And then another 2-year gap, they would come back with kind of a controversial album, I guess you could say. Some people love this album. Some people hate it. Some people, if they hadn't already jumped ship a couple years before, they definitely jumped ship for this one. However, some people consider this an absolute masterpiece and a classic. And I'm kind of on board with that. 1980 got Duke. I mean, note the note the artwork. You know, they were going for something different, something arty and maybe a little more simple. This I would all Genesis albums have prog elements, as to some extent. They were definitely toned down on this one, yet it's still arty as fuck. This is almost more of a art pop, art rock album than, a complete full-blown prog album. But if anyone wants to call this a prog album, I'm certainly not going to argue with you. But yeah, Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford, Phil Collins, and Dave Henschel on backing vocals. I love this album. Definitely one of my favorite, if not my favorite, 80s Genesis albums. However, I like all the 80s stuff. Do I like it as much as the 70s? Probably not as much, but for what it is, it's almost like listening to a different band. But I love all the 80s albums. So coming up next in just a 1 year gap this time, 1981, got Abacab. They were selling a lot of records at this point. This album sold very well. As to what, I don't know, but I know it sold well. I'd say this album is maybe even less proggy than Duke. I've been using the term art pop a lot, and that definitely holds true for this album. I still think it's fantastic. I don't like it as much as Duke. I don't mind the poppy elements in Genesis because they did it so well. Out of all prog bands that kind of transitioned from the 70s to the 80s and became, there was a lot of, into the 80s, there was a lot of label pressure. It seemed like the labels didn't want bands putting out, full-blown prog albums. They wanted, they wanted poppier, catchier stuff. And that pretty much happened to every prog band in the 70s if they wanted to survive in the 80s. But I think Genesis did it possibly better than anyone else. You could argue Rush maybe did it a little better. Rush stayed quite a bit more proggy, I think, into the 80s than Genesis did. But just considering everything I just said, Genesis, they did a very good job at staying relevant and getting more and more popular. So yeah, still Tony Banks, Phil Collins, Mike Rutherford on this album. A nice companion piece to Duke. Yet not sounding at all like the same album by any means. 83, so 2 year gap, they put out their self-titled album, Genesis. Same lineup, I believe. Another fantastic album. Plenty of, I think there's still plenty of prog elements here for, the prog people to dig into. There's plenty of pop tunes on here. There's just, I think there's a little bit of something for everyone. But, what's most important is the songwriting is still awesome. They hadn't really lost anything, even if they had kind of I don't want to say they abandoned all their prog elements from the 70s, but they abandoned a lot of it. They wanted to, I don't know, I don't know if it's them wanting to stay relevant or wanting to get more popular and sell more albums. Either way, they did a good job at kind of, giving you the total package with this album. A lot of people would say this is actually their strongest 80s album. I really wouldn't be able to argue with that. I think I prefer Duke, but I do consider this a masterpiece of an album. So now you had a 3 year gap. They're starting to kind of slow down a little bit. 1986, you had Invisible Touch. This is the album. This is the first album I ever heard from Genesis, and honestly, like I listened to this on cassette when I was a kid a lot, and I didn't listen to any other Genesis albums for a long, long time. Probably at least 10 years, and then I started to actually delve into their to their to everything else. So for me, for a long time, this is what Genesis were all about, and it's for that reason. It's still an album that I absolutely love to this day. I still play it semi-regularly. I still listen to this at least once or twice a year. So this is possibly their most poppy album. A lot of people would say that it sounds very dated and very of its time. There's a lot of keyboards on here. I think the synth work and everything on this album is fantastic, though. There's a lot of electronic drums, which is a big thing in the 80s. Not really sure how I feel about that. The only music that I really ever kind of accepted electronic drums were black metal. Other than that, yeah, I don't really want to hear electronic drums, but still a fantastic album. And this is probably, I'm not a numbers guy, but this is probably their best-selling album of all time. This album just sold so many copies, and you had, the title track "Invisible Touch." You had "Tonight, Tonight, Tonight." It was a big song of its time. "Land of Confusion." My favorite would probably be the proggiest part of the album, which is the 2-part song called "Domino." Clocks in at over 10 minutes. I think it's fantastic. And then I also really like the final track, which is just like an electronic-y instrumental called "The Brazilian." There might be some very, very, very 80s sounding, and some might say cheesy elements, but I think it all works really well. I absolutely love this album. So, oh shit! We're wrapping it up. I got one more. 5-year gap this time, the longest gap up to this point. Obviously, the band was losing steam, to say the least. This came out in '91. An album that, honestly, not really a favorite of anyone, I don't think. We Can't Dance. To be honest, I've only really heard this maybe 3 or 4 times over the years. I probably could spend more time with it, and I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to see if it grows on me more. I never really had. I don't have a lot to say about this. I don't really have a lot of time invested, and it's never really grabbed me. But I think it's due to give it a couple spins. I think this is an album that, it's not ever going to become my favorite Genesis album, but I think I could appreciate it more than I do. That's all I have. They did one more album. I don't even know when, maybe 10 years after this. I can't remember. I've never heard it, and I don't own it. From what I've heard, I'm not really missing much, but I wouldn't mind it. I'll probably pick it up at some point. So, but yeah, that's it. I was debating showing some horror movies, but I think this video is long enough. I'm going to show my daily comic. One of my favorite comic characters and of all time, really, Grendel. This is Grendel Tales, Four Devils, One Hell. I can't remember if I have this whole series, all 6. I might. I really don't remember. So this was written and drawn by a guy named Matt Wagner, and I always really liked Matt Wagner. This is what he's most known for. He's done some other stuff too. But yeah, Grendel, always a weird comic, but very action, a lot of action, a lot of violence. I'm trying to find some good artwork. Give you some examples. I'm not going to really go into details about Grendel's pretty complex character, and there's a lot to say. I would just say if this interests you at all, and if you're a comic fan, it should definitely look into Grendel. Very cool. So, yeah, check out Grendel if you're a comic fan. If you slept on it, you shouldn't. Anyways, that's all I got. That's all the Genesis CDs I have. So my next CD collection video will be picking up after that. I got like Gehenna, General Surgery, Gorgoroth. I can't remember what comes after this, but it's definitely metal, which I know that's, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's why most people watch my channel. So I think a lot of these videos, kind of the non-metal videos, kind of go unwatched. But you know, that's the reason I started this channel. You know, was not to just talk about metal. Talk about all the kinds of music that I like. You know, metal is probably 95% of what I listen to, but the other 5% is shit that I like a lot too. So, there's like I said, there's a lot of Genesis fans out there. So if you happen to find my video, let's talk Genesis. What's your favorite album? Or maybe list your favorite album from every decade. I think that'd be kind of cool. But yeah, let's talk about Genesis. Anyways. Hope everyone's having a good week. Thanks for stopping by. We shall talk soon. Cheers.